اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد. کربلا کے والے سے ایک سلام پیش کرتا ہوں. آؤ ایک کام کریں کربلا عام کریں. آؤ ایک کام کریں کربلا عام کریں. کیا خبر تم نہ رہو کیا خبر تم نہ رہو کیا خبر ہم نہ رہیں. آؤ ایک کام کریں کربلا عام کریں. جس طرح ثانی زہرا نے سے عام کیا ایک زنجیر کی جھنکار نے وہ کام کیا. جس طرح شہداء نے سفر شام کیا یعنی نیزوں سے بھی بلند اسلام کیا. ہم اس درس کے عادت کی ادا عام کریں. کیا خبر تم نہ رہو کیا خبر تم نہ رہو کیا خبر ہم نہ رہیں. آؤ ایک کام کریں کربلا عام کریں. آؤ ایک کام کریں کربلا عام کریں. یہ جو مجلس ہے مداوا ہے ہر ایک غم کے لیے. ایک سوغات ہے یہ دیدہ پرنم کے لیے. سوز دل چاہیے تہذیب محرم کے لیے. کوئی تفریق نہیں حلقہ ماتم کے لیے. رونے والوں کے لیے فرش عزا عام کریں. کیا خبر تم نہ رہو کیا خبر تم نہ رہو کیا خبر ہم نہ رہیں. آؤ ایک کام کریں کربلا عام کریں. آؤ ایک کام کریں کربلا عام کریں. بڑا پیارا شعر ہے. آؤ دیکھو یہ خیمہ یہ علم کس کا ہے. خون سے نم صحرا پہ یہ رقم کس کا ہے. ابھی تاریخ سے آگے یہ قدم کس کا ہے. ساری دنیا کو بتا دے یہ علم کس کا ہے. ساری دنیا کے لیے غم کی فضا عام کرے. کیا خبر تم نہ رہو کیا خبر تم نہ رہو کیا خبر ہم نہ رہیں. آؤ ایک کام کریں کربلا عام کریں. آؤ ایک کام کریں کربلا عام کریں. بڑا پیارا پیغام اس میں. تم بھی سینے میں یہ غم لے کے چلو ہم بھی چلیں. تم بھی سینے میں یہ غم لے کے چلو ہم بھی چلیں. تم بھی انکار ستم لے کے چلو ہم بھی چلیں. تم بھی حق کا حشم لے کے چلو ہم بھی چلیں. تم بھی غازی کا علم لے کے چلو ہم بھی چلیں. ہر زمانے کے لیے ذکر وفا عام کریں. کیا خبر تم نہ رہو کیا خبر تم نہ رہو کیا خبر ہم نہ رہیں. آؤ ایک کام کریں کربلا عام کریں. آؤ ایک کام کریں کربلا عام کریں. رہنما قتل ہوا قتل کے عادت نہ ہوئی. ایک امام اور بڑا ختم امامت نہ ہوئی. جس میں روندے گئے پامال شریعت نہ ہوئی. جس میں روندے گئے پامال شریعت نہ ہوئی. چادریں چھن گئی باطل کی حکومت نہ ہوئی. ایک محمد کے گھرانے کی وفا عام کریں. کیا خبر تم نہ رہو کیا خبر تم نہ رہو کیا خبر ہم نہ رہیں. آؤ ایک کام کریں کربلا عام کریں. آؤ ایک کام کریں کربلا عام کریں. آخری شعر ہے بہت ہی غمگین شعر ہے. پاس شبیر کے اپنے بھی ہیں اغیار بھی ہیں. پاس شبیر کے اپنے بھی ہیں اغیار بھی ہیں، خاندان بنی ہاشم بھی ہیں، انصار بھی ہیں، خاندان بنی ہاشم بھی ہیں، انصار بھی ہیں، حر بھی ہیں، جون بھی ہیں، اکبر جرار بھی ہیں، جان دینے کے لیے صبح سے تیار بھی ہیں، جان دینے کے لیے صبح سے بھی تیار بھی ہیں۔ ایسے مقتل کی فضا کو بخدا عام کریں، کیا خبر تم نہ رہو، کیا خبر تم نہ رہو، کیا خبر ہم نہ رہیں، آؤ ایک کام کریں، کربلا عام کریں۔ صلوات۔
محمد وآل محمد صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل Muhammad. Maulana Sahib, respected Sheikh, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's Jumerat, so I'll ask you to join me to recite Surah Al-Fatiha, once Surah Ikhlas, 3 times for all of our Murhumeen. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Please recite Dua Shafa for all the Marees in our community, especially Mrs. Ayman Nisa, who's critically ill in hospital. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Amma yajib al-mustahara zata'a wa yakshafa su. Amma yajib al-mustahara zata'a wa yakshafa su. Amma yajib al-mustahara zata'a wa yakshafa su. Amma yujibu al-mustahara zata'a wa yakshaf su. Amma yujibu al-mustahara zata'a wa yakshaf su. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I do have a number of announcements, but I think I'll save them for when the gathering's a bit more than perhaps between the Sheikh's presentation and Maulana Sahib reading. So tonight I'm pleased to welcome Sheikh Muhammad Zakaria to Al-Zahra Centre. He's not a new face, but somebody who's familiar to us over the years, so it's been very nice to see him this evening. Sheikh is a senior lecturer at the Islamic College. He delivers modules of study in Quranic sciences and research methodology. He's an active muballigh, having over 30 years of experience of tabligh in the Caribbean and South America, and his chosen subject tonight is yearning for Karbala, Ahlul Bayt communities in the Caribbean. So without any further delay, if I can ask Sheikh to come forward for his presentation. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. You want to stand? Do you want the
Whilst Janab is sorting it out, bi'idhnillah, let me just give a brief introduction. Well, firstly, إخوة وأخوات في الله السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. First, I should say thank you very much to Al-Zahra Center for inviting me. I'm sure that there are other individuals who would be more than pleased to be amongst you, and so I take it as a great privilege to be here amongst you. And seeing how the Jamaat has grown over the years, alhamdulillah, may Allah Azza wa Jalla continue to shower his barakah on the Jamaat. I'm aware that it is a very close-knit Jamaat of family members, and I believe maybe this close-knit family network gives the center its strength. Never let that go. Hold on to that. And bi'idhnillah, the next generation will take the community onto further and better things, bi'idhnillah. Shukran jazilan for the attendance of Sayyid. Sayyid, good to see you, alhamdulillah. And thank you for bringing the barakah with you to the center today. Shukran jazilan. My talk, Ikhwa wa Akhawat, is divided into two parts, as you will see bi'idhnillah from the slides. There's quite a bit of history in it, and the history actually lays the foundation of really what I want to talk about. That is yearning for Karbala, Ahlul Bayt communities in the Caribbean. What is this all about? It's about the presence of Shia Imamiyah, Shia Ithna Ashari communities in the Caribbean for the past 100 or so years. And in reality, these communities have been neglected for a number of reasons. And this neglect, which has transpired over this 100-year period of time, has had initially devastating results, resulting in the communities shrinking in size for a number of reasons. Those reasons could range from individuals leaving Madhab Ahlul Bayt and embracing Madhab Sahaba. It could be that individuals from Madhab Ahlul Bayt in Nabuwa left Islam completely and embraced Christianity. So my talk with the video slides was to introduce by a audio visual presentation actually what I was talking about. So what I'll do is I'll continue, and bi'idhnillah, if the slides come up, then they come up, okay? So where to be mentioned, there is a historical element to my presentation. When we speak of the Caribbean, usually you hear the term the West Indies, okay? But in reality, the West Indies is situated within a larger region, which is called the Caribbean. And the Caribbean is divided into two distinct parts. The West Indies, which includes countries such as Jamaica and Cuba, and the East Indies, which includes countries such as Montserrat, Antigua, Guadeloupe, and Hispaniola. This region, which we refer to as the Caribbean, is divided into 4 distinct linguistic groups. And these linguistic groups are originating from Europe. So we have French, we have Dutch, we have Spanish, and we have English, okay? Now how to change it? There we go, mashallah, khair. You brought the barakah, Sayyid. Alhamdulillah. So these groups, these linguistic groups.
This is not connected, but we got it in the office.
Oh, okay.
So if you prompt us every now and again, just
I
press
will
us
do.
back.
So thank you. These linguistic groups owe their origin to the dominance of the French, the Dutch, the Spanish, and the English in the Caribbean. They stamped their military, political, and economic authorities on the region. During the 1600s, what the Caribbean witnessed was an influx of Muslims into the Caribbean region. And this influx owed itself to a forced entrance, i.e. via the transatlantic slave system. Of the many millions of individuals who were torn away from Africa and brought to the Caribbean, there was a substantial number of Muslims amongst them. I'm here focusing primarily on what is sometimes referred to as the British Caribbean. So when the British went into Africa, enslaved Muslims and brought them into the Caribbean, they settled them in certain islands such as Jamaica, Montserrat, Antigua, Trinidad, Guyana as well. And these Muslims who had been enslaved were mainly from West Africa. The tribes which they came from were predominantly Muslim tribes, such as the Fulani, such as the Hausa, who Sheikh Zaki is a member of. He is a member of the Hausa tribe. Also, the Yoruba tribe. However, the Islam which these unfortunate people practiced was not an Islam which we recognize as Madhab Shia. They were predominantly Ahlus Sunnah, but nevertheless, they were Muslims. Under the severe oppression that was meted out to these individuals and the punishments that were dished out for practicing Islam, many succumbed to this relentless oppression and forgot their Islam. Those who were fortunate enough to escape from the plantation prison were able to practice Islam freely. These individuals who were able to escape, these are the ones who laid the foundation for the remnants of Islam which would be encountered by later influxes from Bharat, from India, which we are going to focus on. So we have two phases of Islam within the Caribbean. The forced entry of African Muslims into the Caribbean, here primarily the British Caribbean, and later on the indentured Muslims traveling from regions such as Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and now what is commonly referred to as Bangladesh, as you can see on the map here. Please leave that slide there for me. Thank you. Okay? So, after the abolishment of slavery, supposedly, in the Caribbean, the British were stuck. The Africans didn't want to remain on the plantation prison, so they left to find economic avenues of their own. Where were the British to get the labor which they required to work on the plantations? Well, they turned to India, pre-partition. Now, the British had been in India from the 1700s, when they entered as the British East India Company, with all the cheating and lying and killing and murdering which they engaged in India, the British East India Company. After the Sepoy revolt, after the uprising of the Indian Muslims, it's called sometimes the Sepoy Rebellion, but that's an incorrect term. It is the uprising. It is the Sepoy War of Independence. After the uprising of the Sepoys in India, the British East India Company lost its stranglehold over the whole of India. And then the British government and the British Crown took over the control of India, and that's where we get the so-called British Raj in India that we hear so much about. The jewel in the crown, as if they brought anything to India. In reality, they took and plundered and stole billions from the land, both Africa and India alike. Next slide, please. So they were stuck for labor. And here now comes what is called the indentured labor system, where they set up offices in Uttar Pradesh, in Bihar and Bengal, and asked individuals to sign up to 5-year contracts to work in a region which they had never heard of. And these 5-year contracts meant that when they arrived in the Caribbean, they had to remain on the plantation. They were not allowed off the plantation without a special pass. Their movements were restricted, and their practice of their religion was also restricted. Many individuals who signed up for the journey thought they were only journeying within India. Many individuals were kidnapped from India and forced into the indentured labor system. What we find is that the individuals who, let's say, freely signed up were Brahmin widows, those widows from a Hindu background who were Brahmin, but as we know, unfortunately, there is a tradition where the Brahmin widow has no prospects in life. She is seen to be worn out now. And so, hoping that her prospects would be more better in the Caribbean, many Brahmin widows signed up for the indentured labor system. Agriculturalists, farmers signed up for the indentured labor system. So we find out of the whole population that left India for the Caribbean, 85% were Hindu, 14% were Muslim. And now this is where I want to focus on. Out of the 14% that left India and crossed, as it's called in the vernacular, the Kala Pani, the majority were Ahlus Sunnah, but there was a sizable Shia presence amongst the Muslim presence. And here now is the yearning for Karbala, where we begin to actually understand what the title actually means. These individual Shias were a minority within a minority. They were subsumed within the larger Sunni populace in the Caribbean. They traveled to countries such as Guyana, Jamaica, Suriname, and Trinidad and Tobago. This is where the Indian Shia Muslims settled. Sizable populations back in the 1830s through to 1917, when the indentured labor system was abolished, primarily because of the agitation of the Indian nationalist individuals such as Mohandas Gandhi and others. How did these individuals survive? Our Shia brothers and sisters, in a land which they didn't know, under a system which was oppressive and sought to extract the maximum amount of work from them for a little amount of pay. Well, as I mentioned, they were stationed on plantations. They couldn't leave the plantation for 5 years. You had to remain on the plantation for 5 years. They were housed in barracks. These barracks were no more than huts, which were in reality not fit for human occupation. The medical treatment which they received was negligible. And if they raised any objections with regards to the treatment that they were facing, they were severely punished. I need to go back a few steps. That journey across the Kalapani, which many thousands of Shias made, was the last journey many of them made, because many were thrown overboard. Many died during the crossing. Many were deprived of the food and water we would expect individuals would receive on such a journey. That didn't happen. We are talking about our Shia brothers and sisters. This must be kept in mind. So now they are in these individual countries as a minority, within a minority, oppressed. They do not speak the language of the people. They are speaking Urdu or they are speaking Hindi. They are not speaking English. Their cultural norms are the cultural norms of India. Their religious practices are not the religious practices of the rulers, the whites, or the majority Africans, nor of the Hindus. So let me give you an example then of a particular country. Let's focus in on Jamaica. And I'm sure you've heard of the country of Jamaica, but for many other reasons. And a Shia presence may not have come to your mind. You may have heard of Jamaica because of the music, the food, and the fast runners, yeah? And sometimes the violence that erupts in that country around election time. But in Jamaica, we are talking about thousands of Shia from the 1800s onwards, observing there. Stay on this picture, please. Stay on this picture. This picture shows the commemoration of Muharram, or the martyrdom of Imam Hussein salawatullahi alayhi. If the picture could pan out, you would see thousands of individuals present. And as you can see, not only are there Asians present, but there are also Africans present. The power of the Muharram commemoration was so much that it crossed cultural barriers, so that it brought in everybody from different communities. Every single year, the Shia would take out the Julus on the streets of Jamaica, do Martyrdom, and commemorate the sacrifice of our Imam salawatullahi alayhi. However, this is the point that we need to touch on. However, what took place was a distancing, a cutting off from the land of origin, i.e. India. So no muballighin were going to Jamaica from India to teach the community the deen. There was no investment. And so over the course of the decades, the thousands of Shias became hundreds. The hundreds of Shias dwindled until you can only now identify in that country 5 active Shia. So what happened to the rest? They became Christian because no muballighin were going. They became followers of madhab Sahaba. Why? Because no muballighin were going. When they wanted their children to learn Quran reading, they would send them to the masajid of the followers of madhab Sahaba. Do you think they would only teach them how to read Quran? They would teach them how to do salah. They would teach them how to do wudu. And so what you can identify in the graveyards within Jamaica are names such as Muhammad Ali, Muhammad Abdul Hussein, Ali Hassanain, and so on and so on. And then what you get is a shift in the names. Muhammad Umar, Uthman Fulan Fulan, Abu Bakr Fulan Fulan, where in reality these people had a definite, clear Shia identity. But because of the lack of investment, because of the cutting off from the global Shia world, the thousands dwindled decade after decade until now, today, we can identify 5 active Shia in that country of Jamaica. One of the first masajids, if not the first dedicated masjid in the country of Jamaica, was established by the Shia, Masjid Imam Hussein. But because the numbers dwindled, and it was opened by, may Allah Azza wa Jal have mercy on his soul, Marhum Muhammad Khan, because nobody was attending, what took place? Members of Ahlus Sunnah took it over. and now it is their center. And this pattern of leaving Islam for Christianity, leaving Madhab Ahlul Bayt for Madhab Sahaba, leaving the country to go to North America, whereby you could practice the deed amongst your co-religionists, can be found in places like Guyana, Suriname, and Trinidad. Let me give you an example. Change the slide, please. Change the slide. Let's get some pictures up. Okay. Go to another slide. And another slide. Again. 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 No, go back. Go back. That's it. Yes, go. No, stop. Go forward. Sorry. Masjid Imam Hussein. Masjid Imam Hussein, Jamaica. Now a masjid of our brothers and sisters from Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Next slide, please. And again. Okay, stop there. So, if we go to Trinidad and Tobago, thousands of Muslims, thousands and thousands of Shia. The same thing took place. I'm going to give you an anecdotal evidence, something that was told to me by one of our brothers. He mentioned, I never knew I was Shia until I began practicing Madhab Ahlul Bayt with you brothers and sisters. We said, why? He said, because I used to see my grandfather every single year put on black clothing, turn off the television, turn off the radio, and begin to cry. For 10 days, year after year, he would cry and cry and cry. We asked, did he do nothing else? He said, no, he just used to cry at a particular time of the year for a particular amount of days. It's only now when you came to us and he began to practice the teachings of Madhab Ahlul Bayt, he realized, oh, my grandfather was Shia. But what remained of the Madhab for him? Only crying. Nothing else. He didn't know how to pray. He didn't know how to read Quran, but he remembered from his youth, as a young boy, this is what his father would do. This is the state, unfortunately, of many of our brothers and sisters throughout the Caribbean, that their Shia identity has been lost. Now, what we've been doing over the past, let's say 5 years, concerted effort. Now, the first community, i.e. the enslaved Africans, and now the descendants of the indentured laborers come together. What we've done is we've mapped the presence of the Shia communities throughout the Caribbean. We've traveled to the Caribbean to meet them. We've conducted on-the-ground needs assessment amongst them to find out, what do you need? What can we offer you with regards to strengthening your presence in the Caribbean and reconnecting your connection with the wider Shia world? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, keep on going. And again, and again. Okay, so at your convenience, move through the slides. So not only have we focused on the English-speaking Caribbean, we've focused on the Spanish-speaking Caribbean as well, amongst our Shia brothers. Pre-COVID, we were able to go regularly. But during the COVID period, we had to adapt our services all online. What you're observing there is some of the online, multilingual activities we conducted during Muharram for our Shia communities in the Caribbean. French, English, and Spanish we focused on. What we are finding is this, that as time goes by, the presence of the Shia in the region is now beginning to re-establish. Our communities are becoming more confident in their identities. Communities are popping up everywhere. The Bahamas, a region where we would have never thought that Shia would have been. But there are many Shia there who have done taqiyya for decades. In Martinique, French-speaking Caribbean, again, they have been doing taqiyya amongst Sunni communities. I hope this is not being televised, okay? So, what we have found is this, that the communities are receptive now to the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt Nabuwah, and we have formed an organization. Go right to the last slide, please, Agha. Right to the last slide. Right there, stop there. We have formed an organization which is responsible for all the tabligh activities amongst our Shia brothers and sisters from the various communities in the Caribbean, called the Association of Ahlul Bayt Communities in the Caribbean and the Americas. Our work is difficult, but by the blessings of Allah Azza wa Jal and the dua of mu'mineen wa mu'minat, we will be successful, inshallah. I'm going to end now and ask us, please, remember those previous generations who were far from Karbala, who were wringing their hands in a land which they didn't know, and were saying to themselves, why did I come here? I have nobody here. I can't practice my deen. There, no more majalis, no more recitation of the Quran. Perform dua for them and ask Allah Azza wa Jal to forgive them of their shortcomings, and bi'idhnillah work to strengthen and return their descendants to Madhab Ahlul Bayt Nabuwah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وبسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي فضلنا على كفار بالإسلام دينا وبالقرآن كتابا وبمحمد نبيا وبعلي إماما وبالمؤمنين إخوانا وبالكعبة قبلة. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على محمد وآل محمد.
Thank you, Sheikh, for a very insightful presentation on the Shia communities in the Caribbean. I think it reminds us also of the Shia in Bosnia as well, who discovered their real identity decades later because of the oppression under communism, and then their freedom once Yugoslavia broke up. So that's a similar story for us. Just a few announcements before I invite Malana Saab. Just to remind everybody that Muharram 1444 starts tomorrow evening. All the evening programs will start at 8 p.m. With the Quran or Dua, followed by English Majlis, Maghribain, and then the Urdu main Majlis will be after Maghrib prayers. Tomorrow, though, there will be no English lecture. There will be a special flag ceremony starting shortly after 8 o'clock. So if all the brothers are here, please come tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock. We'll have Mulana Mirza Nur al-Hassan, who will be reciting the Muharram Ashra, will be here as well. And there will be a small ceremony outside. So that's tomorrow, 8 p.m. The ladies' programs start Saturday morning, 10 a.m. There will be a flyer going out this evening or tomorrow. So ladies' programs start Saturday morning, 10 a.m. If you'd like to sponsor any programs, niyaz, donations, membership, then over the next 12 nights, the treasurer and his assistant Imran Hussain will be on hand to collect those. If you need any information on sponsoring niyaz, making donations, then you should speak to the treasurer and the assistant treasurer as well. Now, without, of course, tomorrow there'll be Jummah at the normal time, 12 p.m. Now, with any further delay, if I can ask Maulana Muhammad Rizvi to come forward, speak in Urdu. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Ya Rasulullah. Ya Ali. Ya Ali. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الأفضل الموجودات، العبد المؤيد الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد والمحمود الأحمد، سيدنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا، صاحب الوقار والسكينة، المدفون بأرض المدينة، أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، واللعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين. قال إمامكم الصادق صلوات الله وسلامه عليه: نفس المحموم لظلمنا تسبيح وهمه لنا عبادة. بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات. صلى على محمد. Respected Maulana, Sheikh, respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Just a few minutes I have to mention a few words of Masaib, as tonight being Shab-e Jum'ah and the last Shab-e Jum'ah before we enter the month of Muharram. Tomorrow, as you've heard, Majalis will begin, and once again, Mu'mineen, Mu'minat around the world. SubhanAllah, very interesting and refreshing to hear that there are Mu'mineen who mourn for Aba Abdullah al-Hussein across the globe. You think it's only in Pakistan or India or Iraq or Iran, but as respected Sheikh was giving his informative presentation, it reminded me of a hadith which has been narrated by both Sunni and Shia. I think since it's mostly youth, is everyone okay with English? The hadith in both Sunni and Shia sources says that when Imam Hussain alayhi salam was born, Rasulullah instantly began to cry. Instantly he began to shed tears. And that worried the Lady of Light, Fatima Al-Zahra. She came to Rasulullah, she said, Ya Rasulullah, is this a time to cry? I mean, when a child is born, you congratulate. You come and you become happy. But how strange of Rasulullah to cry. And one of the ulama said this was the first majlis of Hussein, where Rasulullah cried. When people say, why do the Shia cry? Rasulullah was the first one to cry for Aba Abdullah al-Hussein. But as I was listening to this presentation, it reminded me of this hadith. Why? Because the hadith is, it goes on. Rasulullah then explains to her. He says, "Oh Fatima, oh my child Fatima, I cry because Jibreel has just informed me what will happen of my beloved Hussein in Karbala." And so he explains to her all of the masaib that will take place. You know what Bibi Fatima says to Rasulullah? She says, Ya Rasulullah, will you be around? He says, no, O lady, I will not be around. She says, Oh Rasulullah, will Ali be around? He says, no, Ali will not be around. She says, Oh Rasulullah, will his brother Hassan be around? She says, no, he says, no, Hassan will not be around. Then she says, Oh Rasulullah, tell me, will me, his mother Fatima, will I be around? He says, no, oh Fatima, you will not be around. And the hadith then says this, and this is what reminded me of this hadith. She says, Oh Rasulullah, then who will cry for my Hussein? Allah Akbar. Then who will shed tears for Abu Abdullah? You know what Rasulullah says? Rasulullah promises her. He says, Oh Fatima, Allah will raise a nation. The hadith says, Qawm, Allah will raise a qawm, a nation, who will shed tears for Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And that qawm, that nation is not limited to any one country or within a border. That nation is around the globe. Whoever cries for Abu Abdullah al-Hussein is a part of that qawm, is a part of that nation. Allahu Akbar. We are entering Muharram. I just want to mention Masaib today, a few words of Masaib. Brothers and sisters, whenever you enter Muharram, make one dua. And don't forget to make this dua. What is that dua? Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow you to shed tears for Hussein. Because honestly, you don't shed tears for Hussein unless you have tawfiq from Allah. You know, and if you find it hard to cry, then you should pray harder for Imam Hussein, to Allah for crying for Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. The hadith says, sometimes it is my sins that prevent me from crying over Abu Abdullah. Sometimes it is the heart that becomes hard that prevents me from crying for Abu Abdullah. So whenever the month of Muharram approaches, if there's any one dua that we should have, oh Allah, allow us to shed tears for Hussein. Ayatollah Sayyid Mar'ashi Najafi used to say, when I die, put this handkerchief on my grave. They said, why? He says, because I will show this to Fatima on the day of judgment. That as long as I lived, I cried for Hussein's and I wiped my tears with this handkerchief. He would say, put this on my chest when you bury me. Cry for Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And if you cannot cry, then speak directly with Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Oh Hussein, what is the problem with me? Why can I not shed tears on your masaib? Allahu Akbar. The Maqtal states that even the enemy was crying when Imam Hussein brought out Ali Asghar before his martyrdom. Allahu Akbar. Even the enemy would cry. And this is why Umar al-Sa'd al-Mal'un would call out Harmala and say, oh Harmala, put an end to the speech of Hussein. What has happened to my army? Ajrakum ala Allah. We enter the month of Muharram. Whenever the month of Muharram would approach, you would see Aim Ahlul Bayt, signs of grief and sorrow would overtake them. You know what Imam Rada alayhi salatu wasalam says to Du'bal al-Khaza'i? He says, oh Du'bal, come closer. And then Du'bal comes closer and he says to him, recite something for me that will remind me of my grandfather Hussein. He gathers everyone in his house. He puts forward a curtain. He brings his women to sit on the other side. Look how Ahlul Bayt prepared for Azadari. Look how Ahlul Bayt honored and favored and recommended Azadari. Not only that, they invite the Zakir. Who's Du'bal al-Khaza'i? The Zakir. One who recites for Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Go and look in the history. One who recites Marsiya for Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. He says, oh, our friend, Imam Ali ibn Musa Rada calls him as a friend. And he says, recite Masaib for us. And as he begins to recite Masaib, Imam Hussein begins to cry. Imam Rada alayhi salam begins to cry. The more he recites, the more he cries. You know what the hadith says? That as Imam Ali ibn Musa Rada cries, just next door, Bibi Fatima to Ma'suma Qum begins to cry. And as the intensity of the Marsiya begins to increase, The hadith says there comes a point Fatima to Ma'suma faints when she cannot handle the masaib of Aba Abdullah. Ajrakum ala Allah, 2 words of masaib, and I leave you tonight. Dear brothers, when Imam Hussein was leaving Medina, many people would stop him. Imam Hussein is already on his way. On the 2nd of Muharram, he will enter Karbala. Imam Hussein is getting closer and closer to Karbala. On the 2nd of Muharram, his caravan will enter Karbala. And when he enters Karbala, he asks, what is the name of this land? They say, this land is Nainawa. They say, he says, does it have another name? He says, the land is known as Taf. He says, does it have another name? He says, yes, this is the land of Karbin wa Bala. At that moment, he says something that breaks the heart of Bibi Zainab. You know what he says? He says, oh Abbas, set camp here. This is where they will kill our children. This is the land where they will shed our blood. This is the land where our women will be taken as captives of Bani Umayyah. Ajrakum ala Allah. You know, this was the dream of Imam Hussein. When he was leaving Medina, he comes on the grave of Rasulullah. He throws himself on the grave of Rasulullah and he says, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulallah, ana al-Husayn ibn Fatima. He says, oh Rasulullah, I am Hussein, the son of Fatima, your Fatima. And the hadith says he cries and he cries until he faints on the grave. What does he see? He sees a dream. Who does he see? He sees Rasulullah. What does Rasulullah do? He holds Imam Hussein, he embraces him. He kisses him on the forehead. He kisses him on the neck. When Imam Hussein sees his grandfather Rasulullah, do you know what he says to his grandfather? He says, Ya Rasulullah, take me with you. I have no desire to return to this dunya. This land of Medina is not now a place where I can live. Ajrakum ala Allah. But you know what Rasulullah says? Rasulullah reminds him, oh Hussein, there is a promise that you made that must be filled. What is that promise? Inna Allah qad yaraka qatila. Inna Allah qad sha'a an yaraka qatila. Rasulullah says, oh Hussein, it is the will of Allah that you must come to us through martyrdom. Then he says, oh Rasulullah, but what about our women? What about my sisters? He says, oh Hussein, their test is harder. Zainab will be taken as a captive to Kufa. From Kufa to Sham. Do you know what was the hardest thing for Imam Hussein? It was not his martyrdom. It was not the martyrdom of Ali Akbar. It was not the martyrdom of Ali Asghar. It was the fact that Zainab would be paraded between the soldiers of Bani Umayyah. That was by far the hardest thing for Imam Hussein. And Sayyid Sajjad, Ajrakum ala Allah. Last line I leave you with this point. Ajrakum ala Allah. May Allah give you no grief except that of Aba Abdullah. Welcome the month of Muharram. Welcome the month of Muharram with your tears. Welcome the month of Muharram by offering your condolences to the mother of Hussein, Fatima Al-Zahra salamullahi alayha, who will be here amongst you in the next 10 nights. Ajrakum ala Allah. Do you know what Salma says? I leave you with this. When Imam Hussein left Medina, he left behind Salma. He left behind al-Banin, the mother of Abbas. And he left behind a daughter, Sheikh Mazandarani, in his Maqtal of Ma'ali al-Subtain. He says he left behind Fatima al-Sughra, the sister of Ali Asghar, the sister of Ali Akbar. Ajrakum ala Allah. When Salma says that Rasulullah had informed me of the day of Ashura, Rasulullah had given me amongst the turbat of Karbala. He had given me from the clay of Karbala. And he says to me, oh Salma, the day this clay turns red, know that my Hussein has been slaughtered in Karbala. And you know, for 10 days, she would get up and she would look at this clay. The second day, she would look at this clay. The third, every day, Salma would look at it. Her heart would get heavier and heavier as she got closer and closer to the day of Ashura. I leave you with this last line. As she got closer and closer to Ashura, Her heart would get heavier and heavier. She at one point became tired. The clay did not change its color. She fell asleep, and the time of Asr Ashur came. She sees a dream. What does she see in the dream? She sees Rasulullah does not have a turban on his head. She sees Rasulullah has blood on his clothes. She says in the dream, Ya Rasulullah, what is this state of yours? I have never seen you in such a state. Do you know what Rasulullah says? Oh, Salma, you worry about my state. Had you seen the state of Aba Abdullah on the day of Ashura? Had you seen what they did to my son Aba Abdullah al-Hussein? She says, oh Rasulullah, what is this blood on your clothes? He says, oh Salma, this is the blood of all of the Shuhada of Karbala. I have been in Karbala since the morning. Every Shaheed that fell, I came forward and I held the body of that Shaheed in my lap. It is the blood of all of the Shuhada. I end here. I say, Ya Rasulullah, when the Ashab fell, you took their bodies in your lap and you were patient. When Qasim fell, you were patient. When Ali Akbar fell, you were patient. When Ali Asghar's neck was hit with the arrow, you were patient. When Abbas' arms were cut, you were patient. But Ya Rasulallah, how were you patient when Shimr sat on the chest of Aba Abdullah? When Shimr held the khanjar, he held the dagger in his arm. In his right hand was the dagger. In his left hand was the beard of Aba Abdullah. Ala la'natullahi ala al-qawm al-zalimin. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ وَالْعَاقِبَةُ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. Matam Hussein. Ya Hussein.
छोड़ के मदीना ٹور بین تے برا چالی گراچ کلی چالی گراچ کلی ہائے رہ گئی سگرا ہائے چور کے مدینہ ٹور بین تے برا ہائے چور کے مدینہ ٹور بین تے برا چالی گراچ کلی چالی گراچ کلی ہائے رہ گئی سگرا ہائے چور کے مدینہ ٹور بین تے برا ہائے چور کے مدینہ ٹور بین تے برا نام تو مسافراں دے ملے آئے حکم غازی لکھ نام تو مسافراں دے اصغر تے دی سکینہ اصغر تے دی سکینہ اکبر تے کبرا ہائے چور کے مدینہ ٹور بین تے برا ہائے چور کے مدینہ ٹور بین تے برا ہائے چور کے مدینہ ٹور بین تے برا ملے آئے حکم غازی لکھ نام تو مسافراں دے ملے آئے حکم غازی لکھ نام تو مسافراں دے اصغر تے دی سکینہ اصغر تے دی سکینہ اکبر تے کبرا ہائے چور کے مدینہ ٹور بین تے برا ہم شکل میں ڈیمادی سگرانو وچ بازاراں دے ہم شکل میں ڈیمادی سگرانو وچ بازاراں دے متا لوگ نایا کل متا لوگ نایا کل لو آ گئی زہرا ہائے چور کے مدینہ ٹور بین تے برا ہائے چور کے مدینہ ٹور بین تے برا ہائے چور کے مدینہ ٹور بین تے برا ہم شکل میں ڈیمادی سگرانو وچ بازاراں دے ہم شکل میں ڈیمادی سگرانو وچ بازاراں دے متا لوگ نایا کھن متا لوگ نایا کھن لو آ گئی زہرا ہائے چور بہن تے برا ہائے چور تے برا چالی گراچ کلی چالی گراچ کلی ہائے رہ گئی سگرا ہائے چھوڑ کے مدینہ تر بہن تے برا ملے آئے حکم غازی لکھنا میں تو مسافر دے ملے آئے حکم غازی لکھنا میں تو مسافر دے اصغر تے دی سکینہ اصغر تے دی سکینہ اکبر تے کبرا اے چھوڑ کے مدینہ تر بہن تے برا اے چھوڑ کے مدینہ تر بہن تے برا اے چھوڑ کے مدینہ تر بہن تے برا تیرے بعد کی میں جیسا اکبر میں سکھ دی مر ویسا تیرے بعد کی میں جیسا اکبر میں سکھ دی مر ویسا پھپیاں دے نال ویرن پھپیاں دے نال ویرن میرا نام بھی لکھا ہائے چھوڑ کے مدینہ تر بہن تے برا ہائے چھوڑ کے مدینہ تر بہن تے برا ہائے چھوڑ کے مدینہ تر بہن تے برا تیرے بعد کی میں جیسا اکبر میں سکھ دی مر ویسا تیرے بعد کی میں جیسا اکبر میں سکھ دی مر ویسا پھپیاں دے نال ویرن پھپیاں دے نال ویرن میرا نام بھی لکھا ہائے چھوڑ کے مدینہ تر بہن تے برا ہائے چھوڑ کے مدینہ تر بہن تے برا ہائے چھوڑ کے مدینہ تر بہن تے برا چالی گراچ کلی چالی گراچ کلی ہائے رہ گئی سگرا ہائے چھوڑ کے مدینہ تر بہن تے برا ہائے چھوڑ کے مدینہ تر بہن تے برا ہائے چھوڑ کے مدینہ تر بہن تے برا ہم شکل میں ڈیمادی سگرانو وچ بازاراں دے ہم شکل میں ڈیمادی سگرانو وچ بازاراں دے متا لوگ نہ آکھن متا لوگ نہ آکھن لو آ گئی زہرا ہائے چھوڑ کے مدینہ تر بہن تے برا ہائے چھوڑ کے مدینہ تر بہن تے برا ہائے چھوڑ کے مدینہ ملے آئے حکم غازی لکھنا میں تو مسافراں دے ملے آئے حکم غازی لکھنا میں تو مسافراں دے اصغر تے دی سکینہ اصغر تے دی سکینہ اکبر تے کبرا ہے چور کے مدینہ تور بین تے برا ہے چور کے مدینہ تور بین تے برا ہے چور کے مدینہ تور بین تے برا تیرے بعد کی میں جیسا اکبر میں سکھ دی مر ویسا تیرے بعد کی میں جیسا اکبر میں سکھ دی مر ویسا پھپھیاں دے نال ویرن پھپھیاں دے نال ویرن میرا نام بھی لکھا ہے چور کے مدینہ تور بین تے برا ہے چور کے مدینہ تور بین تے برا ہے چور کے مدینہ تور بین تے برا ہم شکل میں ڈمادی سگرانو وچ بازاراں دے ہم شکل میں ڈمادی سگرانو وچ بازاراں دے متا لوگ نہ آکھن متا لوگ نہ آکھن لو آ گئی زہرا ہے چور کے مدینہ